It's rather interesting how when African Americans speak about ancient black history, it all of a sudden offends non-black people and anti-Afrocentrics. They know we had the crown, and just like in the past, they are trying to take the knowledge away from the African's crown. Kind of like how they took the uraeus off the crown of this black pharaoh of the 6th dynasty.
Message!
So we got some new YouTubers going around spewing archaic biased information from the early 1900s, saying that the ancient Egyptians was majority one big tan-skinned Mediterranean civilization and blacks were the minority or simply slaves.
Say this. Egypt faces the Mediterranean. I am Mediterranean. My sea, my history too.
Man, sit your dumb ass down.
Although you will hardly ever hear modern academia say that ancient Egypt was a Mediterranean civilization, Egypt is rooted in Africa and should always be looked at in an African context. Which is why when modern academia want to study the behavior of the ancient Egyptians, they don't look to the Mediterranean, they go study other indigenous Africans and draw parallels.
And the similarity between the two styles is quite remarkable.
You will probably hear people say that yes, modern academia admits that the original ancient Egyptians were African, just not black.
Man, sit your dumb ass down.
Yet in Soakita's published work, the studies of ancient cranial from northern Africa confirm that early southern pre-dynastic Egyptians' cranial show tropical African affinities. Anytime you mention tropical and African in the same sentence, you're talking about black people.
I'm blacker than black and I'm black.
Or how about when bioarchaeologist and professor at Southampton, Sonia Ruth, found that the samples from the Badarian to the Middle Kingdom in Upper Egypt had tropical bodies, and their proportions were actually super-negroid. It don't get no blacker than super-negroid.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black and I'm black.
The experts have spoken. Egypt is adjacent to some of the most blackest people on the planet, and there is no scientific reason that the ancient Egyptians would not share biological origins with other black Africans. Furthermore, in 2020, Kenya God analyzed a series of cranial which included 2 pre-dynastic Egyptian series, the Badarian and Nakata, a series of A-group Nubians, and a Bronze Age series from Palestine. It turned out that both the Egyptian series were more related to the Nubian series than to the Palestine. But yet you still got people asking ignorant questions like this.
What do you mean by black?
Man, sit your dumb ass down.
Another new ignorant statement anti-Afrocentrics and smart dummies are saying is the reason the Egyptians in the past shape-shifted from dark to light skin is because they didn't live in houses with air conditioning units.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Based on that statement, they admit that by natural selection, the original inhabitants of that geographical location would have been black. And based on historic chronology and primary evidence, these black populations, specifically in northern Egypt, were absorbed by an influx of light-skinned Bronze Age Eurasians. We know that the original population was black and stretched further than S1 because the Badarian region is located in Middle Egypt. And like analysts have already confirmed, the Badarians had Nubian and tropical affinities. But where did these tropical affinities come from? And how did the Badarians get them? Scientists have already confirmed that between 11 and 5,000 years ago, northern Africa was a tropical rainforest region. This time is known as the African humid period. But what was once a tropical, wet, and thriving environment suddenly turned into the desert we see today. And who lived in North Africa during this time? The tropical African.
This represents the father of the globe. This represents the father of civilization.
A prehistoric cemetery linked to the southern Egyptians was found to be most similar to modern populations from sub-Saharan Africa, including the Pygmies. This tells us that a Pygmy-related group, possibly similar to the Hadza or even the now extinct Elaru, was actually living much further north in Africa, miles away from where they are currently found in West and Central Africa. If that's the case, there's a high possibility that North Africa and possibly the Middle East and Europe was once a rainforest region and was very likely an extension of the Niger-Congo region. This is because pygmies are rainforest people, and you will never find a pygmy outside of the rainforest. Furthermore, it's very hard to mistake the cranial remains of a pygmy. Their body proportions and limbs are very identifiable. The Khadan culture were tropically adapted Africans that originated in Upper Egypt 15,000 years ago. They were the first to take some of the earliest steps towards proper agriculture. They also took up hunting and fishing, and developed more advanced weapons and tools, and established a unique ritualistic burial practice that included some of the earliest forms of cemeteries. They used pottery, weave baskets, and were the first to develop sickle independently. The characteristics of the Khadan culture played a vital role in the emergence of pre-dynastic Egypt, gradually bringing the foundation towards the emergence of the ancient Egyptian civilization.
Why the black man is the father of civilization.
This cultivating tribe lasted in Egypt for 4,000 years, but where did they go? Many Egyptologists claim that the Khadan culture disappeared. In other words, they're trying to say that the ancestors of the earlier cultivating tribes who were living in Northeast Africa disappeared, likely after the Ibero-Maurusians and the Natufian herders invaded. Yet we can still find the descendants of the Khadan culture. The Nuba people living in Northeast Africa are primarily farmers. Both the Nuba and the South Sudanese Nilotic have a very ancient presence in Northeast Africa and across the entire North African region. Unlike the Nilotic, who speak Nilotic languages, the Nuba speak a language of both Nilotic and Niger-Kaddofian origins. Niger-Kaddofian is linked to West African languages. The mixture of languages also tells me that the Nuba are mixed. It's very likely that the ancestors of the Nuba were a kind of mix between Nilotic and other older Africans like the Pygmies, Hasda, and Elaru. However, because the Nuba language is closely related to West Africa Niger-Congo speakers, people often assume that the Nuba migrated to North Africa from West Africa, but there is no evidence of this. In actuality, it is more evidence that the Nuba are the last remnants of an ancient land-cultivating people indigenous to Northeast Africa who were heavily absorbed by nomadic cattle herders coming in from the Middle East. Hence why they sought refuge in the Nuba Mountains. Could the Great Sphinx be evidence of these tropical African cultivating tribes that originated in North Africa? And are the Nuba and West and Central Africans descendants of these ancient people? Join in my journey as I unveil what has been hidden.